The morning mist still clung to the ancient oak trees that dotted the sprawling estate, lending an ethereal, almost magical quality to Graceland. It was a place usually buzzing with life even at dawn. The quiet hum of staff getting ready, the distant murmur of the Memphis highway, the occasional chirp of a cardinal in the perfectly manicured gardens. But today there was a different sound, a soft, almost inaudible whimpering coming from near the iron gates that stood as majestic sentinels at the property's entrance. Security guard Ben Harper on his usual morning patrol was the first to notice. His eyes, trained to spot anything out of place, caught a small, huddled shape near the rose bushes, partially hidden by the low-hanging branches. At first he thought it might be a discarded bag, but then the whimper came again. A fragile sound that tugged at something deep inside him. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively going to his walkie-talkie, but stopping short as he saw it clearly. It was a dog. Not a big dog, not a tiny one, but somewhere in between. Its fur, once perhaps a light brown or sandy color, was matted and dirty, caked with mud and burrs. Ribs were clearly visible beneath its thin coat, and its tail was tucked so tightly between its legs it seemed permanently glued there. Its eyes, when they finally flickered open and met Ben's, were wide with a mix of terror and exhaustion, rimmed with a dull, vacant desperation. This wasn't just a stray. This was a lost soul. Teetering on the edge, Ben knelt down slowly, keeping his movements gentle. "Hey there, fella," he murmured, his voice soft. The dog flinched, trying to shrink further into the bushes, but it didn't run. It seemed too tired to run. Ben knew he couldn't just leave it. Graceland had rules, of course, about strays and unauthorized visitors, but compassion often outweighed protocol here, especially with the Pawsley family at its heart. He pulled out his walkie-talkie. "This is Harper. Got a situation at the main gate. A stray dog looks pretty bad off." The voice on the other end from the head of security sounded a little annoyed but resigned. "A dog, Harper. Can you just coax it out? We don't want it disturbing anything, especially if Mr. Presley is up." "It's not moving, sir, and it's not a threat, just scared and hungry. I think it needs help." A sigh. "All right, just keep an eye on it. I'll send someone over to assess. Don't let it wander too far in." Ben stayed put, keeping a quiet distance from the dog, who eventually closed its eyes again, its small body trembling intermittently. The sun was starting to climb higher, casting longer shadows across the lawn. The air was cool but promised a warm day. Inside the mansion, a familiar voice drifted from the kitchen. "What's all the fuss about?" Elvis Presley, dressed in a silk robe, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, had come downstairs, drawn by the unusual murmur of voices from the staff. He was an early riser, especially when the creative spark or restless energy kept him from truly settling in bed. He loved the quiet mornings at Graceland, the peace before the day truly began. "Good morning, Mr. Presley." Nancy, one of the housekeepers, said, her eyes a little wider than usual. "Just a small issue. Sir, a stray dog has found its way onto the grounds." Elvis paused, his eyebrows raising slightly. A stray. He loved animals. Always had dogs, horses. "Even." "Yes, sir." Ben found it near the main gate. "Looks quite ill. They say they're trying to figure out what to do." Elvis took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant. He thought of his own dogs, the ones he'd had growing up, the ones he had now pampered and well fed. The idea of a creature suffering right outside his gates stirred a deep ache in his chest. He was known for his generosity, for his giving nature, but it wasn't just about money. It was about heart. "Ill, you say?" he repeated, a frown creasing his brow. "Well, what are they waiting for? Someone go get it some food, some water. Don't just leave it out there." Nancy hesitated. "Mr. Presley, the security head, Mr. Jenkins," he said, "to assess it first. They don't want it spreading anything or causing trouble." Elvis put his coffee cup down on the counter with a soft thud. His voice, though still calm, held an edge of quiet authority that brooked no argument. "Nancy, I don't care about assessing a starving animal. It's on my property, and it needs help. Now, is someone going to get some water and food, or do I have to go out there myself?" Nancy immediately scurried to grab a bowl, her eyes wide with understanding. Everyone knew Elvis's soft spot for creatures in need. Elvis, meanwhile, walked to the large window overlooking the front lawn. He squinted, trying to spot the animal. He saw Ben Harper still kneeling, a quiet silhouette against the growing light. He saw the rose bushes, and then he saw it. A small brown lump of misery barely visible. His heart went out to it. He knew what it felt like to be alone, to feel lost even in a crowd. He knew what it felt like to be hungry for something more, something comforting. This dog, this poor creature, had found its way to Graceland, perhaps by instinct, perhaps by pure chance. He felt a sudden, undeniable pull towards it. It was more than just a stray dog. It was a silent plea, a lost soul calling out for kindness. "Just bring the food and water to me," Elvis said, turning from the window. "I'll take it out there." Nancy looked surprised. "You, me," he confirmed, a determined glint in his eyes. Quickly changed out of his robe into a simple t-shirt and jeans, not bothering with much else. He knew dealing with scared animals required patience, quiet, and a lack of intimidating fanfare. He wasn't the king of rock and roll right now. He was just Elvis, a man with a soft heart and a desire to help a creature in need. He took the bowl of fresh water and a plate piled with leftover scrambled eggs and bacon, a breakfast fit for a king, and now perhaps for a very lucky stray. As he walked towards the front door, the morning at Graceland began to hum with a different kind of energy, one born not of fame, but of quiet compassion. Elvis stepped out onto the wide porch, the morning air cool and fresh, against his face. He carried the plate of food and bowl of water carefully, making sure not to spill anything. Ben Harper, seeing him approach quickly, stood up, looking a little flustered but relieved. "Mr. Presley, sir, you didn't have to," Ben began, but Elvis simply raised a hand, a gentle smile on his face. "Nonsense. Ben couldn't let the poor thing go hungry, could we?" He lowered his voice, keeping it soft and reassuring. "Where is it?" Ben pointed to the rose bushes. "Still there, sir. Hasn't moved much. Just trembles a lot." Elvis nodded. He surveyed the scene. The dog was indeed still huddled, almost invisible amidst the green foliage. He took a slow, deep breath. He knew approaching a scared animal was like approaching a wild one. Sudden movements, loud noises, or direct eye contact could trigger a fight or flight response. He needed to be calm, patient, and non-threatening. He walked slowly, deliberately, not directly, towards the dog, but in a wide arc, giving it plenty of space. He kept his gaze slightly averted, looking at the ground or the trees, occasionally glancing towards the dog with soft, indirect glances. He knelt about 10 feet away from the bushes, setting the food and water down gently on the grass. "Hey there, little fella," he murmured. The same voice that had charmed millions now used to soothe a single terrified animal. "It's okay, you're safe now. Got some good food for you." The dog, which had been frozen, had tucked slowly, lifted its head. Its eyes, still wide and wary, fixed on Elvis. It didn't move, but its ears, which were matted and a little torn, twitched almost imperceptibly. Nose quivered, catching the scent of the eggs and bacon. Starvation was a powerful motivator, even for fear. Elvis remained still kneeling on the cool, damp grass. He didn't push, he just waited. The sun climbed higher, warming his back. He could feel the eyes of the staff who had gathered discreetly on the porch, watching the scene unfold, but all his focus was on the small creature before him. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The dog trembled, a constant shiver running through its emaciated body. It looked from the food to Elvis, then back to the food, an internal struggle playing out in its tired eyes, hunger, warred with an instinctual fear born from who knows how many bad experiences. "It's all right, boy," Elvis whispered, trying to project a sense of calm and safety. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here, just some food. You must be mighty hungry." He slowly, carefully pushed the plate of food a little closer with one finger, then pulled his hand back quickly, not wanting to scare it. The dog's nose twitched again. A small, almost imperceptible whine escaped its throat. And then very slowly, tentatively, the dog began to crawl out from the bushes. Its movements were stiff, hesitant, like every muscle ached. It kept its body low to the ground, belly almost dragging as if trying to appear smaller, less of a target. Its tail remained tucked, but its ears were now fully forward, listening, assessing. Elvis didn't move a muscle. He watched as the dog inched closer, one painful step at a time. It reached the plate, sniffed it cautiously, then with a sudden burst of desperation began to devour the food. It ate quickly, ferociously, not even chewing properly, just gulping down the eggs and bacon as if afraid someone would snatch it away. Its whole body shook with the effort, and a few times it coughed. Its throat not used to such rich fare, Elvis felt a profound wave of relief wash over him. It was eating. That was the first hurdle cleared. He watched it finish the food, then move to the water, lapping it up with the same desperate urgency. When the bowls were empty, the dog looked up, its eyes still wary. But something else was there now, a flicker of something that resembled gratitude, or perhaps just a profound exhaustion. "Good boy," Elvis said softly, his voice full of warmth. He extended his hand slowly, palm open, fingers slightly curled, a universal sign of peace. He kept it low, not reaching directly for the dog, but offering it. "It's okay. No need to be scared anymore." The dog watched his hand, its small body still tense. It sniffed the air, then took another tiny hesitant step forward. Its nose gently brushed against Elvis's outstretched fingers. It was a brief touch, a tentative exploration. Then, as if startled by its own courage, it pulled back slightly, its tail still tucked, but not quite so rigidly. Elvis didn't force it. He kept his hand there, unwavering, patient. He knew this was a dance, a careful negotiation of trust. This dog had clearly been through a lot. Its fear wasn't just instinct. It was a deeply ingrained response to harsh treatment, to abandonment. He knew he had to prove to it that he was different, that Graceland was different. He stayed kneeling, maintaining eye contact only in brief soft glances. He hummed a quiet tune, a low, soothing melody that wasn't one of his hits, just a simple, wordless tune. The dog listened, its head tilted slightly. Its trembling had lessened, replaced by a deep sigh, as if the food and water had allowed it to finally relax a fraction. Elvis watched the dog's side still heaving and noticed a patch of matted fur on its back leg, perhaps an old injury. This creature needed more than just a meal. It needed care, love, and a safe place to finally rest its weary head. "You're a brave one, aren't you?" Elvis murmured, withdrawing his hand slowly. "Came all this way. You picked a good place to land, little fella." "A good place." He stood up, slowly, making sure not to startle the dog. He left the empty bowls on the grass, a promise to return. The dog watched him go, not running, not shrinking away. And in its tired eyes, Elvis saw not just fear anymore, but a glimmer, a tiny spark of something that looked like hope. He knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that this dog wasn't leaving Graceland anytime soon. The rest of the morning became a quiet vigil for Elvis. He delegated his usual duties, pushing back calls and meetings. His mind, usually buzzing with music and tour plans, was now fixated on the small, scared creature outside. He watched from the windows, sipping his coffee, ensuring the dog remained on the property. Ben Harper and other staff members understood. They kept their distance, silently respecting Elvis's unique approach. Around noon, Elvis decided to try again. This time he brought a soft, old blanket and a small, squeaky toy items he'd found tucked away in a closet, perhaps from a forgotten family pet. He approached the dog in the same slow, deliberate manner, kneeling down a little further away than before. The dog, now slightly less frantic, watched him warily from its spot under a different rose bush, having moved only a few feet. "Hey, Dixie," Elvis said, trying out a name that had popped into his head, simple, southern, and sweet. "How about a nice soft place to rest?" He gently unfolded the blanket and laid it on the grass, a few feet from the dog. He then placed the squeaky toy beside it. Dixie, as Elvis now silently called him, sniffed the air, his eyes tracking Elvis's movements. He still trembled, but it was less of a violent shudder and more of a persistent shiver. He seemed less likely to bolt. Elvis sat down cross-legged on the grass a comfortable distance away. He didn't try to touch, didn't even speak much, just maintained a calming presence. He started humming again, a low, soothing sound. Sometimes he'd sing a verse of a gentle gospel song, his voice a balm on the quiet morning air. Closed his eyes sometimes, just feeling the sun, letting the dog get used to his presence without feeling observed. He simply existed there, patiently. Hours crawled by. The dog, exhausted by fear and hunger, eventually lay down, though still tense, its head resting on its paws, eyes half closed but always keeping Elvis in its peripheral vision. It eventually noticed the blanket and, driven by comfort, slowly, painstakingly dragged itself onto the soft fat side, a deep, shuddering breath. And for the first time its body seemed to sag a little, releasing some of its tension. Elvis felt a surge of triumph. A small victory, but a significant one. He then slowly reached out, placing his hand on the ground between them. He didn't push it forward, just offered it as an invitation. Dixie lifted his head. Observing the hand, his nose twitched. He seemed to debate, his small brain weighing the unknown against the profound relief of the blanket and the calm presence of this strange, kind man. Then, with a sudden, unexpected flicker of curiosity, he extended his neck, sniffing Elvis's fingers. It was the lightest, most tentative touch. Elvis held his breath, not daring to move a muscle. Dixie's nose was cold and wet against his skin. Then, incredibly, Dixie licked his finger. Once. A small, rough lick that felt like the most precious thing in the world. Elvis's heart swelled. "That's it, boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "That's it. You're a good boy." Emboldened by the lack of threat, Dixie nudged his hand again. Then, with a bravery born of desperate need for comfort, leaned his head against Elvis's palm. Elvis gently, ever so gently, began to stroke the top of Dixie's head behind his ears. The fur was matted and rough, but beneath it he could feel the warmth of life, the fragile pulse of a creature finally finding a moment of peace. Dixie closed his eyes, leaning into the touch. A soft whimper escaped him, not of fear, but of profound relief. He pushed his head harder into Elvis's hand, seeking more contact, more of that gentle, reassuring stroke. His tail, which had been stubbornly tucked, gave one small, tentative wag, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a tiny flicker of joy in a world of fear. Elvis continued to stroke him, his thumb rubbing soft circles behind Dixie's ears. He could feel the tension slowly drain from the dog's body. Dixie nestled closer, eventually resting his head on Elvis's knee, a silent surrender. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection. No words were needed, no grand gestures. Just the simple, profound act of one living being offering comfort and trust to another. Elvis felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He thought of all the times he felt lonely, isolated by his fame, surrounded by people but often truly alone. This small, abandoned creature had found him, and in its brokenness it offered a connection that felt more real, more grounding than almost anything else. Continued petting Dixie until the dog eventually drifted off to sleep, a deep, exhausted sleep, head heavy on Elvis's knee. Little snores beginning to rumble from his chest. Elvis stayed there, unmoving, unwilling to disturb the fragile peace. He just watched the dog sleep, a protective warmth spreading through him. Later, Nancy brought out a light lunch for Elvis, leaving it discreetly on the grass a few feet away. She smiled a soft, understanding smile, seeing the king of rock and roll sitting on the ground, a stray dog sleeping soundly against his leg. It was a sight few would ever witness, a glimpse into the true heart of the man. As the afternoon wore on, Elvis carefully scooped up the sleeping Dixie, blanket and all. The dog stirred, but didn't protest, merely snuggled deeper into the warmth of the blanket in Elvis's arms, carried him into the house, past the hushed staff, up the grand staircase and into his own private living room. A room usually reserved for close friends and family. He laid Dixie gently on a comfortable rug near the fireplace, placing a squeaky toy beside him. Dixie stretched, yawned, and then, after a brief sleepy glance at Elvis, curled up tightly, drifting back into a deep, trusting sleep. Elvis just watched him, a quiet smile playing on his lips. The first touch had happened, the first bond had been forged, and Graceland, already full of music and memories, had just welcomed a new, very special heartbeat. Dixie's first night inside Graceland was surprisingly peaceful. Elvis had set up a makeshift bed for him in his private living room, just off his bedroom, a comfortable dog bed borrowed from his parents' poodle, covered with one of his own old, soft blankets. He'd made sure Dixie had plenty of fresh water and a small bowl of kibble specially bought for him. Elvis himself had slept better than he had in weeks, a quiet sense of contentment settling over him. He woke several times in the night, listening. Each time, he heard the soft, steady breathing of the dog, a comforting presence just a few feet away. In the morning, Dixie was still curled up, looking a little more rested, a little less gaunt. When Dixie finally stretched and opened his eyes, he seemed disoriented for a moment, looking around at the grand room. Then his gaze fell on Elvis, who was sitting in a nearby armchair watching him. A small, tentative wag of his tail began a shy greeting. "Morning, Dixie," Elvis murmured, his voice gentle. "Sleep well?" Dixie pushed himself up, padded over to Elvis, and then, to Elvis's surprise, jumped onto his lap, curling up into a tight ball, resting his head on Elvis's chest. His body was still bony, but the fear was replaced by a deep need for comfort and closeness. Elvis gently stroked his fur, feeling the little tremors still running through him, but they were now tremors of past trauma, not present fear. Over the next few days, Dixie slowly, hesitantly began to explore his new home. He was still wary of loud noises and sudden movements, flinching if someone spoke too loudly or walked past too quickly, but Elvis was a constant calming presence. He spent hours on the floor with Dixie, playing gently with a squeaky toy, talking to him in soft tones, simply being there. The Graceland staff, initially cautious, quickly fell in love with the little dog. Vernon, Elvis's father, who was often stoic, would quietly sneak Dixie treats. Minnie May, his grandmother, would coo over him, calling him a sweet little angel sent from heaven. Priscilla, when she visited, was immediately smitten, petting him gently and marveling at his newfound comfort around Elvis. "He really trusts you, Elvis," she observed one afternoon, watching Dixie curled up at Elvis's feet while he played the piano. "It's amazing how quickly he's come around." Elvis smiled, continuing to strum a soft melody. "He's a good boy. Just needed to know he was safe. Every living thing needs to know that, don't they?" Dixie began to venture further. He'd follow Elvis from room to room, a furry shadow always keeping him in sight. He loved the sunroom where he'd bask in the warmth, and the sprawling lawns where he could sniff every blade of grass. Though he never strayed far from the mansion itself, he was beginning to look less like a stray and more like a cherished pet. His fur, though still matted in places, was starting to regain some of its natural sheen, and the dark circles under his eyes were fading. One evening, Elvis was sitting on the couch watching TV, with Dixie curled up beside him, sound asleep. He reached down and gently scratched Dixie behind the ears. The dog sighed in contentment. Elvis knew without a shadow of a doubt that Dixie belonged here. This wasn't a temporary arrangement. This was home. He thought about the future. Dixie would need to see a vet, get proper shots, a good bath, but all that could wait a little while. The most important thing right now was to continue building this fragile trust, this precious bond. He looked at Dixie, truly looked at him. His fur was a patchy, light brown and white. His ears were floppy, and one was slightly torn. He had a sweet, expressive face, and when he was happy, his whole body wiggled. He was simply Dixie, a mutt, a stray, now Graceland's newest, most beloved resident. The staff started referring to him as Mr. Presley's dog, or Dixie, and they all treated him with the gentle respect usually reserved for family. Meals were prepared for him, walks were taken, and quiet conversations were held around him. Graceland, already a hub of activity and emotion, seemed to soften around the edges with Dixie's presence. His quiet comfort, his small happy sighs added a new rhythm to the house. One afternoon, Elvis was out on the grounds with Dixie throwing a soft ball. Dixie, still a bit clumsy, would chase it with surprising enthusiasm, his tail wagging furiously. He wasn't the fastest or most graceful dog, but he was certainly the most joyful. He'd bring the ball back, drop it at Elvis's feet, and then look up expectantly, a happy grin on his face. Elvis laughed, a pure, unburdened sound that echoed across the lawn. This was the peace he often craved, the simplicity he rarely found. Dixie didn't care about his fame, his records, or his schedule. Dixie just cared about the hand that fed him, the voice that soothed him, and the presence that made him feel safe. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over Graceland, Elvis called Dixie to him. Dixie bounded over, nudging his hand. Elvis knelt, wrapped his arms around the dog and hugged him tight. Dixie licked his face, his tail thumping against Elvis's back. "You're home, boy," Elvis whispered into Dixie's soft fur. "You're home." And Dixie, as if understanding every word, simply leaned into the embrace, a contented sigh escaping him, settling deeper into the warmth of the man who had given him not just food and shelter, but a place to finally belong. He was no longer just a stray. He was Dixie, a cherished member of the Graceland family, and this grand mansion was finally, truly, his home. Dixie's transformation was remarkable. In just a few weeks, he had shed much of his skittishness. His fur regularly brushed by Nancy, and even Elvis himself had regained its healthy luster. His ribs were no longer visible, replaced by a healthier, more muscular frame. He played, he napped, he followed Elvis everywhere, and his tail was almost constantly in motion, a joyful blur. Yet, despite his obvious positive change, whispers of doubt began to surface. It wasn't malicious, but born of concern and practicality. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was the first to voice it, albeit indirectly, during a phone call about upcoming tour dates. "Elvis, I heard about this dog," the colonel's gravelly voice drawled over the phone. "A stray, is it now? Look, I know you got a soft spot for animals, but Graceland ain't a kennel. And what if it's got something, or what if it gets out and bites someone? Publicity, nightmare. Son." Elvis felt a familiar tightness in his chest. "Colonel, he's a good dog. He's gentle, and he's been to the vet. He's had all his shots and a clean bill of health. He's not going anywhere but a stray. Elvis, there are shelters for these things, professional places. You're a busy man. You got tours, movies. Who's going to look after a dog that needs constant attention?" Elvis gripped the phone tighter. "I am, Colonel. When I'm here, I'll look after him. When I'm gone, my family and the staff will. He's not a burden, he's family." The colonel sighed, clearly unconvinced. "Just think about it, son. For your own good. You don't need any more distractions." It wasn't just the colonel. Vernon, while fond of Dixie, occasionally voiced a gentle concern. "Son, he's a fine dog, but he's a lot of responsibility. And what if he gets attached and you're gone for months? It ain't fair to the dog either. Even some of the staff, though they loved Dixie, quietly wondered how long this arrangement would last. Elvis was known for his big heart, but also for his sometimes impulsive decisions. Would Dixie just be another passing fancy? Elvis heard these concerns, saw the raised eyebrows, felt the unspoken questions. It stung. It felt like they were questioning his commitment, his ability to care for something so vulnerable, but it also hardened his resolve. Dixie wasn't a distraction. He was a source of peace, a grounding presence in a chaotic life. He was a creature that needed him, and Elvis had rarely felt so needed in such a simple, pure way. One afternoon, a vet from Memphis, Dr. Albright, came for a follow-up visit. Elvis insisted on a house call to minimize stress for Dixie. Dr. Albright, a kind elderly man who had seen many of Elvis's animals over the years, conducted a thorough examination. "Well, Mr. Presley," he said, patting Dixie gently, "he's certainly put on weight. And those eyes full of life now. He's a remarkable little fellow. You've done wonders for him." "Is he healthy?" Elvis asked, kneeling beside Dixie, who was leaning into the vet's touch. "Healthy as can be now, just needed. Good food, a safe place, and a whole lot of love." "Looks like you found all three here." Dr. Albright paused, looking at Elvis. "He's certainly bonded with you, Mr. Presley. I've rarely seen a stray take to a new home so quickly. He feels safe with you." "He is safe," Elvis stated, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "This is his home now." Dr. Albright smiled warmly. "I can see that he's lucky to have found you." The vet's words, though simple, bolstered Elvis. They confirmed what he already knew in his heart. He looked at Dixie, who was now licking his hand, his tail wagging furiously. This dog, this once broken creature, trusted him completely. He wouldn't let anyone take that away. That evening, Elvis called his family together: Vernon, Minnie May, and Priscilla. "I want to talk about Dixie," he began, his voice calm but serious. "I know some of you have concerns. I understand that. But I want to be clear. Dixie is staying. He's not a temporary thing. He's part of this family." Vernon sighed, but there was a softness in his eyes as he looked at the dog curled at Elvis's feet. "We just worry about you, son, and about him." "I know," Elvis said, "and I appreciate it, but this isn't just about me. It's about him. He needs a home, a forever home. And I believe Graceland is that home. I will make sure he's cared for, no matter what my schedule is. He's brought something truly special to this house, something we all needed." Minnie May reached out and patted Dixie, who nudged her hand. "He is a sweet thing, my boy, and he certainly brings a smile to your face. And that's all that matters, ain't it?" Priscilla nodded, putting a hand on Elvis's arm. "He does, Elvis. He really does." Conversation wasn't a fierce argument, but a quiet affirmation. Elvis had spoken, and his family, seeing the depth of his conviction and the genuine happiness Dixie brought him, accepted it. The whispers of doubt didn't completely disappear from the wider circle, but within the walls of Graceland, Dixie's place was now secure. He was not just a guest. He was a resident, protected by the king's unwavering commitment. And as Dixie snored softly at his feet, Elvis felt a profound sense of peace. He had found his loyal companion, and he would ensure Dixie would never be abandoned again. With his place at Graceland secured, Dixie began a more profound healing journey. Not just of his physical wounds, but of his spirit. Elvis made sure he received the best care, not just from the vet, but from the everyday routine of comfort and love. The first major step was a thorough cleaning. Nancy, with Elvis supervising gently, undertook the task of bathing Dixie. It was a slow, careful process. Dixie was initially terrified of the water, whimpering and trying to hide. But Elvis's calm presence and soothing words eventually calmed him. Elvis sat on the floor of the large laundry room, gently stroking Dixie's head as Nancy worked. "Easy, boy, easy," Elvis murmured, his voice a steady anchor for the trembling dog. "Almost done. You'll feel so much better, I promise." The water turned muddy brown as the grime of the streets washed away. Beneath the matted fur, a soft, sandy-colored coat with patches of white began to emerge. Nancy worked through the tangles with gentle hands, revealing a much softer, cleaner dog. When she was done, Dixie, though still a little damp, looked like a different animal. He shook himself vigorously, sending droplets everywhere, then nudged Elvis's hand as if asking for approval. "Look at you, handsome fella," Elvis chuckled. "Rufflin' dog now." Next came the focus on his diet. Elvis instructed the kitchen staff to prepare special meals for Dixie, small portions of high-quality dog food, mixed with occasional additions of lean meat or vegetables. He was determined to restore Dixie's health completely. Slowly, the hollows in Dixie's body filled out and his muscles gained strength. He was no longer just skin and bones. He was a sturdy, healthy dog, but the physical healing was only part of it. Dixie's emotional wounds were deeper. He still flinched at sudden movements, especially from strangers. Loud noises like a car backfiring or a dropped plate would send him cowering under furniture. He would sometimes wake from sleep, whimpering, no doubt, reliving old nightmares of abandonment and fear. Elvis, noticing these reactions, became Dixie's quiet protector. He would speak in low tones, move slowly around him, and always offered a comforting hand. When Dixie seemed distressed, if a new guest arrived, Elvis would introduce them to Dixie, gently explaining, "He's been through a lot, just be slow with him." Taught the staff to use soft voices and avoid surprising movements around the dog one afternoon. Elvis was practicing in the music room. He was working on a new song, a bluesy tune with a powerful, emotional crescendo. As he hit a particularly loud chord on the piano, Dixie, who had been dozing by the fireplace, yelped and darted under the piano. He knelt down, peering under the piano. "Dixie, hey?" "It's okay, boy. It's just me." Dixie was huddled in the dark, his eyes wide with fear. Elvis gently coaxed him out, speaking softly, offering his hand. He led Dixie back to the fireplace, sat on the floor, and pulled him into his lap, stroking him gently, humming a quiet, wordless tune until Dixie's tremor subsided. From that day on, Elvis was more mindful of Dixie's sensitivities. He would often play quieter, gentler music when Dixie was nearby. He'd open doors, slowly announce his presence when entering a room. He made small adjustments to his own behavior, not as a burden but as an act of profound care. As weeks turned into months, Dixie blossomed. He still had his quirks, a dislike for thunderstorms, a tendency to hide shoes. But his overall demeanor was one of profound contentment. He started showing more playful behavior. He would chase squirrels in the yard with surprising agility, bark at the mailman with newfound confidence, though still retreating behind Elvis's legs if the mailman looked at him, and even initiate play with some of the more familiar staff members. His bond with Elvis deepened into something truly unique. Dixie would wait patiently by the door when Elvis left the room, his eyes following him everywhere. When Elvis was upset or stressed, Dixie seemed to sense it. He would nudge Elvis's hand with his nose or rest his head on Elvis's lap, offering a silent, comforting presence. One night, Elvis was going over some difficult contract details, his brow furrowed in concentration. He felt a soft weight on his feet and looked down to see Dixie curled up there, his head resting on Elvis's slippers, snoring softly. Looking at the peaceful dog, Elvis felt a wave of calm wash over him. All the stress, the worries seemed to lessen in that moment. Dixie wasn't just healed, he was a healer. He had brought a quiet, profound joy into Graceland and into Elvis's often tumultuous life. He was a constant reminder of simple, unconditional love, of the power of kindness, and of the incredible resilience of a spirit that had found its safe harbor. And Elvis, watching him sleep, knew that Dixie's presence was one of the greatest blessings Graceland had ever received. Life at Graceland settled into a comfortable rhythm with Dixie as a permanent fixture. He was no longer just a rescued stray. He was Elvis's shadow, his confidant, and an unexpected source of profound peace. For a man whose life was a constant whirlwind of fame, demands, and public scrutiny, Dixie offered a quiet sanctuary. Elvis found himself spending more and more time simply being with Dixie. He'd take long walks with him around the extensive Graceland grounds, Dixie trotting happily at his side, sniffing every interesting scent, his tail wagging like a metronome. These walks were different from his usual hurried trips to the stables or the meditation garden. They were slow, contemplative, punctuated by Dixie's playful antics or gentle nudges for a pet. "You know, boy," Elvis would often say, bending down to scratch Dixie behind the ears, "sometimes you're the only one who makes any sense." Dixie would just look up with those soulful eyes, as if understanding every word, and give a soft lick to Elvis's hand. Dixie became a constant presence in Elvis's private study. While Elvis worked on music, reviewed scripts, or made phone calls, Dixie would be curled up on a plush rug nearby, or sometimes even snoozing on the couch, emitting soft, contented snores. His presence was a subtle, calming hum in the background, a steady warmth. When Elvis was wrestling with a difficult song, or feeling the pressure of an upcoming performance, he would often pause, lean back, and reach for Dixie. Stroking the dog's soft fur, feeling his steady breathing seemed to ground him. The simple, non-judgmental affection Dixie offered was a balm for his often troubled mind. "They just want another hit, Dixie," Elvis would murmur, running his hand along the dog's back. "Always more, never enough." Dixie would shift, look up at him, then rest his head back down as if to say, "I understand, but you're good enough for me." Dixie was a silent listener. Elvis found himself talking to the dog more than he talked to some people. He'd share his frustrations, his hopes, his quiet joys. Dixie would respond with a tilt of his head, a soft sigh, or a gentle nudge. A perfect empathetic audience of one. One evening, after a particularly draining day of meetings and photo shoots, Elvis retreated to his room feeling utterly exhausted and drained. He just wanted to be alone. He collapsed onto his bed, staring at the ceiling. A few moments later, he felt a familiar, soft weight land beside him. Dixie, sensing his mood, had quietly climbed onto the bed, nudging his hand with his nose. Elvis turned his head and looked at the dog. Dixie simply looked back, his eyes full of uncomplicated love. Elvis reached out, pulling Dixie closer, resting his head against the dog's warm fur. Dixie responded by licking Elvis's face, a soft, comforting gesture. Elvis lay there for a long time, just breathing in the quiet comfort of Dixie's presence. He felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease the frantic thoughts in his mind. Slow down. Dixie didn't ask anything of him. He didn't judge, didn't demand, didn't care about fame or fortune. He just loved. Their routine became a source of quiet joy for Elvis. Mornings often started with Dixie nudging him awake. A soft whine for attention. Breakfast was shared, Dixie getting his own special plate near Elvis's feet. Afternoons involved playtime on the lawn or quiet companionship indoors. Evenings ended with Dixie curled up nearby as Elvis relaxed or listened to music. This simple companionship was a profound antidote to the intense pressures of his life. Dixie was an anchor pulling him back to something real, something pure. He reminded Elvis of the simple beauty of life, of the profound power of unconditional love. He often wondered what Dixie's life had been like before Graceland. He imagined the hardships, the loneliness, the fear. And he felt an even deeper gratitude that this little dog had chosen Graceland as his haven and Elvis as his rescuer. In turn, Dixie's presence changed, a little less restless. His laughter with Dixie was always genuine, unforced. The quiet joy Dixie brought him spilled over into other areas of his life, making him feel more content, more centered. Dixie was more than a pet. He was a loyal friend, a furry therapist, a source of unwavering affection. He was the king's companion, and in the quiet moments they shared, Elvis knew he was truly blessed to have this heart-warming little heartbeat in his home. A living testament to love and compassion in a world often starved for both. As Dixie fully embraced his role as Graceland's cherished canine resident, his personality truly blossomed. He wasn't just a quiet, comforting presence anymore. He was a joyful, sometimes mischievous, ball of furry energy, constantly creating new, heartwarming memories for Elvis and the household. One of Dixie's favorite pastimes became borrowing Elvis's socks. Elvis would often find a single sock, usually a brightly colored one, carefully extracted from his dresser drawer and deposited under the bed, or sometimes daringly right in the middle of the hallway. He'd find Dixie, looking innocent, a guilty twinkle in his eyes, but never with the sock in his mouth. It was a game, a silent challenge. Elvis would just shake his head, a smile playing on his lips, and retrieve the rogue sock. It was a small, silly thing, but it always brought a moment of lightheartedness to his day. Another favorite game was chasing squirrels. Graceland's sprawling lawns were home to many squirrels, and Dixie considered it his personal mission to keep them on their toes. He'd crouch low, wagging his tail furiously, then burst into a joyful sprint, barking with gusto. Of course, the squirrels were always faster, scampering up the nearest oak tree with ease. Chattering at Dixie from a safe height, Dixie would sit at the base of the tree, panting, happily looking up with a comical expression of defeat and determination. Elvis would watch from the porch, laughing, feeling the sun on his face, the sound of Dixie's happy barks filling the air. Dixie also developed a fondness for the swimming pool. Not for swimming, mind you. He was terrified of actually getting in the water, but for sitting by the edge watching the ripples and occasionally barking at his own reflection. One hot afternoon, Elvis was lounging by the pool, and Dixie trotted over looking hot. Elvis dipped his hand into the cool water and splashed a little onto Dixie's nose. Dixie jumped back, startled, then looked at Elvis with wide, surprised eyes, as if to say, "What was that for?" Elvis laughed, and Dixie, despite his initial shock, wagged his tail. Intrigued, it became a playful ritual, Elvis splashing a few drops, Dixie flinching dramatically, then wagging his tail, nudging Elvis for more. He had a habit of helping with the mail. When the mailman approached, Dixie would burst out barking, not aggressively, but with a proud, protective air. Once the mail was delivered, he would carefully sniff the envelopes, then sometimes grab one in his mouth and proudly carry it to Elvis, tail wagging like he'd just delivered a top-secret message. Elvis would praise him lavishly, taking the slightly slobbery mail with a chuckle. Dixie also loved to be tucked into bed every night, without fail. He would wait patiently by Elvis's bedside. Once Elvis was settled, Dixie would jump up, circle a few times, and then burrow under the covers, nestling himself against Elvis's side. Elvis would pull the blanket up over him, and Dixie would let out a contented sigh, his little body a warm, comforting weight. It was a small, intimate ritual that solidified their bond every single night. These small daily moments, woven into the fabric of Graceland life, created a tapestry of heartwarming memories. Elvis, despite his global fame and demanding career, found immense joy in these simple, pure interactions. Dixie's uncomplicated happiness was infectious. He reminded Elvis to find joy in the little things, to appreciate the present moment, and to simply. He saw how Dixie's playful spirit also lifted the spirits of the staff. Nancy would coo over him as he nudged her hand for a treat. Ben Harper would throw the ball for him during his rounds. Vernon would smile, a rare, genuine smile, as he watched Dixie frolic in the yard. Dixie was more than just Elvis's dog. He was Graceland's unofficial mascot, a source of collective joy and affection. Elvis often found himself simply watching Dixie, watching him chase a sunbeam across the floor, or meticulously chew on a bone, or curl up for a nap in the most unlikely of places. He marveled at the resilience of the little dog who had once been so broken, now so full of life and love. One afternoon, Elvis was strumming his guitar on the porch, a quiet melody drifting through the air. Dixie was curled up at his feet, listening, his eyes closed, occasionally letting out a soft sigh. As Elvis played, a particularly sweet note resonated, and Dixie, without opening his eyes, nudged Elvis's foot with his nose. As if offering a silent compliment, Elvis stopped playing, looked down at the dog, and smiled. It wasn't about the charts, the sold-out arenas, or the adoring fans. It was about this quiet moment, this simple connection, this shared peace. Dixie had brought so much more than just a presence to Graceland. He had brought a new kind of love, a new kind of joy, and countless memories that would be cherished forever. Life at Graceland continued its extraordinary pace, but amidst the whirlwind of calls, contracts, and creative endeavors, Dixie remained Elvis's steadfast anchor. Their bond, forged in fear and nurtured with kindness, grew stronger with each passing day. It was a connection that went beyond words, a silent understanding that proved truly unbreakable. There was one particular day that highlighted the depth of this bond, a day when Elvis felt the immense weight of his world pressing down on him, and Dixie, in a simple, profound way, became his unexpected salvation. Elvis was in his music room. Late at night, a new album was due, and the pressure was immense. He'd been working for hours trying to find the right melody, the perfect lyric. But nothing seemed to click. Every note felt flat, every word hollow. Frustration mounted, turning into a simmering anger that churned in his gut. He slammed his hand on the piano keys, a jarring chord echoing through the quiet room. Dixie, who had been sleeping peacefully on his usual rug by the fireplace, immediately lifted his head. His ears perked and he looked at Elvis with wide, concerned eyes. He rarely heard Elvis angry, and the sharp sound of the piano keys had startled him. Elvis ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "It's just not coming, Dixie," he muttered, more to himself than the dog. "It's all just noise, empty." He felt the familiar loneliness creep. The isolation that even millions of fans couldn't fill. Dixie, sensing the shift in Elvis's mood, slowly got up. He didn't approach immediately. Instead, he walked over to where Elvis had tossed a crumpled sheet of music paper, nudged it with his nose, then looked back at Elvis, as if encouraging him. Elvis ignored him, collapsing onto the couch head in his hands. The weight of expectations, the constant demands, the feeling of being pulled in 1,000 different directions. It was all too much sometimes. He felt a deep weariness settle over him, the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. Then he felt a soft nudge against his knee. He looked up. Dixie was standing there, his head tilted, his eyes looking directly into Elvis's. And then Dixie did something unexpected, pawed gently at Elvis's hand, then nudged it towards his own head, asking to be petted. Elvis hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out. He began to stroke Dixie's fur, feeling the warmth of his body, the rhythmic thumping of his tail beginning against the couch. Dixie leaned into the touch, then with a soft sigh climbed onto the couch beside Elvis, nudging his way closer until he was pressed against Elvis's side. He rested his head on Elvis's leg, looking up at him with unwavering loyalty. Elvis continued to stroke him, and slowly, gently, the knot of tension in his chest began to loosen. Dixie didn't offer advice, didn't ask questions, didn't demand anything. He simply offered his presence, his comfort, his unconditional love. In that moment, Elvis realized how much he relied on this simple, pure connection. He felt the stress slowly drain out of him, replaced by a quiet calm. He closed his eyes, resting his head back against the couch. Dixie, a warm weight against his side. The silence of the room was no longer oppressive. It was soothing, filled only by Dixie's soft breathing. "Thank you, boy," Elvis whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you," Dixie responded with a soft whimper, a gentle lick to Elvis's hand, then settled in, content to just be there. Hours passed. Elvis didn't go back to the piano. He just sat there, Dixie by his side, finding solace in the quiet companionship. He realized that this dog, this once scared stray, had become more than just a pet. Dixie was a true companion, a confidant, a reminder of the simple, essential things in life. This was the unbreakable bond. It wasn't forged in shared triumphs or grand adventures, but in quiet moments of vulnerability, in the simple act of one being comforting another. Dixie had shown Elvis that even the king, surrounded by a kingdom, needed the unvarnished love of a loyal heart. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Elvis finally stirred. He felt lighter, clearer. The frustration from before was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. He looked down at Dixie, still sleeping peacefully beside him, a picture of absolute trust. He reached out and gently stroked Dixie's head. "All right, boy," he murmured. "Let's go write some music." And as Elvis rose, feeling the stirrings of a new melody in his mind, Dixie stretched, yawned, and then followed him, a silent, unwavering promise of companionship, a living testament to the powerful, comforting love that now beat at the very heart of Graceland. Years passed, and Dixie became more than just a resident of Graceland. He became part of its very soul. The scared, skinny stray who had wandered onto the grounds was now a dignified, beloved family member, his once tucked tail now a constant, joyful wag. His morning ritual was still to nudge Elvis awake, a gentle reminder that a new day had begun. His afternoons were spent patrolling the gardens, chasing squirrels with less speed but no less enthusiasm, or napping in sunbeams that streamed through the mansion windows. His evenings always ended curled up beside Elvis, a warm, comforting presence. Elvis's life remained a whirlwind of tours, recording sessions, and public appearances. But the quiet moments at Graceland, spent with Dixie, became his most cherished. He often spoke of Dixie in interviews, sometimes sharing anecdotes of his dog's antics or his uncanny ability to sense Elvis's moods. Fans already captivated by Elvis's charisma found another reason to love him through his obvious devotion to this once abandoned dog. Dixie, in turn, remained deeply devoted to Elvis. He would wait by the door whenever Elvis left, and his excitement when Elvis returned, even after a short absence, was boundless. A flurry of happy barks, tail wags, and enthusiastic licks. He was a constant, pure source of unconditional love, a rarity in Elvis's fame-filled world. He was there through joyous celebrations, the quiet moments of reflection, and the occasional times of stress or sadness. He was Graceland's heartbeat, a constant reminder of the warmth and compassion that truly defined the king of rock and roll, far beyond the stage lights and screaming crowds. The staff often remarked on how much Dixie had changed Elvis. He seemed softer, more patient, more grounded. Dixie had helped Elvis connect with a deeper part of himself, a part that yearned for simplicity and genuine affection. In Dixie's trusting eyes, Elvis saw himself reflected not as a superstar, but as a kind, loving human being. One quiet afternoon, Elvis was sitting on the porch swing, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the Memphis sky in hues of orange and purple. Dixie was lying at his feet, head on his paws, occasionally letting out a soft sigh of contentment. The air was still filled only with the distant chirping of crickets. Elvis reached down and stroked Dixie's head. His fur was still soft, though now touched with a few silver hairs around his muzzle, signs of graceful aging. Dixie looked up, blinked slowly, and nudged Elvis's hand. "You know, boy," Elvis murmured, his voice low and reflective, "you wandering onto this place, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me." Dixie responded with a soft whine, then rested his head back down as if absorbing the sentiment. Elvis smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. He thought back to that first morning, the scared, starving dog huddled under the rose bushes. He remembered the slow, patient process of building trust, the tentative first touch, the joyous realization that Dixie finally felt safe. It had been a journey, a transformation not just for Dixie, but for Elvis himself. Graceland was a monument to Elvis's success, a symbol of his iconic status. But for Elvis, it was home, and Dixie had made it even more so. He had brought a living, breathing warmth to every corner of the mansion, a reminder that true wealth wasn't measured in records sold or movie deals, but in the love shared, the lives touched, and the hearts healed. But in doing so, he had given Elvis a priceless gift, a sense of belonging, an unwavering friendship, and a constant, heartwarming presence that truly made Graceland not just a house, but a sanctuary of love. He was Graceland's new heartbeat, and it would beat strongly, faithfully for all the years to come.